everybody. Welcome. My name is Mona Damluji. I'm faculty here in the Department of Department of Film and Media Studies at UC Santa Barbara. And I'm really delighted. It's really an honor to have Sanaz Sohrabi here with us today. Sanaz, of course, is the filmmaker who created scenes of extraction in every sense of the word. She's also a colleague at Concordia University and as well as a filmmaker, also a visual artist who works with photographic archives and installation as well. So I'm just going to preface our conversation. We'll have a conversation, and then at the end we'll be able to open it up to your questions. So please do think about what questions you have in mind if I don't address them. So I just want to acknowledge that in this present moment, what we're witnessing unfold in Iran today, as we know, and as this film really emphasizes, is a continuation of histories that have been unfolding not only in the last 2 years in the context of the genocide in Palestine and Gaza, but also these longer histories of imperialism and colonialism and extraction from Iran in particular, and the longue durée of those struggles. The film really lays out these histories and points to some of the lessons that we have within it and the things to draw our attention to, including, of course, the visual representations of that history. So in this film, one thing that is incredibly striking is that we're watching, as you show us from the very beginning with the construction of the Trans-Iranian Railway, the early construction of infrastructure in Iran in a moment where the obliteration of those infrastructures are before us. And so the weight of that is profound. And I wanted to sort of begin by talking with you about land and landscape. So the film really gives us so many ways to see land, to understand the relationship to land. And I was just hoping you could say a little bit about the way that landscape has figured in the many ways that you approach the entire film.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's really my honor to be here with you and also be part of your book launch, Pipeline Cinema, which is really amazing tomorrow. And I hope that everyone gets the book and reads it. And also thank you to everyone for being here. Emily, for helping me arrive here today and organizing all the travel details. I think it's really important to anchor the film in the present moment, because over the years that I've been working on this project, this trilogy that I'm finishing soon, I always try to use the archives to think historically in the present, because that's one way that we can use these materials to understand this threshold that we have from these moments that have been captured in the archive, in the images, in the photographs, and the present moment, and the wake or the aftermath of these imperial plunders, if you will. And of course, it's been 6 days of this. What is the word to use for this illegal invasion of complete annihilation of a sovereign country of over 90 million. It's so fucking ugly. I'm sorry for using that word, but it's like I can't come up with any other word. It's so fucking ugly. I get a lot of messages from friends in Caracas, because I was in Venezuela in April for my film. And it's interesting how we compare our anatomy of collapse with each other. it's like we check in with each other, and we are it's interesting, in January people were like, is Venezuela going to become Libya? Now it's like, is Iran going to become Iraq? Is Iran going to become Libya? So it's like, what are the metrics we are using to compare our destruction by a very naked imperial power? So of course it's very emotional for me, and I think it's and again, this is speaking of land and landscape. I think the question, I think it's very interesting because I think a lot about images. Of course, I come from my training is in photography. I was trained as a photographer, and I started making films after doing photography. And you can see I'm a bit nerdy with history of photography and how I think about images. And I think a lot about different genres of photography, for instance, like landscape photography or portrait photography. That was really the early styles of genres of photography. And there is something about this way of a specific type of photography that renders an abstraction, right? That you remove the people from the land, you remove any form of other forms of existence before the arrival of these forms of colonial camera. So that results in creation of sublime from, let's say, explosions, as you saw in the images in the film, or aerial images that, again, they create these forms of abstraction of the landscape. So my training in photography was really instrumental in how I see landscape through these images. And so that's one thing that I think is important to mention, because I was always really interested in also the relationship between photography and cinema in relation to land and landscape. I think I was really questioning, what does it mean to see a photograph of a land and then see a panorama of it, the same landscape? Or what does it mean to see a photograph of a worker working frozen in time, but then see a group of workers working in relation to time? So yeah, so I think that was kind of like a starting point. I think my early foundational education in photography and my understanding of history of photography in relation to landscape photography and aerial surveys, archaeological surveys, which were really prevalent and important, and especially in this early period that I was looking at.
Yeah, the film, one of the sort of arguments it puts forward is this relationship, or the parallel, and also the intersection between the act of surveying land and making it legible and knowable and readying it for extractive purposes, alongside the ethnographic filming and the practices of rendering an entire country, entire people legible and knowable for the justification of those extractive desires, and really enabling it through the use of film and photography in very particular ways. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about these, the archive that amassed. So you've talked about, and in the film you talk about these visual regimes. So the visual regime of oil extraction. Could you describe a little bit the contours that you have found that existed, and how you've navigated the sort of the datafication, the production of seismic and survey-based knowledge of the land alongside these other representations of Iran?
Yeah, the geological photos that I started to work with for this film were really fascinating in their own ways, particularly because they were really like scientifically they were produced for a very specific scientific purpose, as at least how they were kind of like accumulated originally by the geological department. But at the same time, when you think about their changing role and changing audiences, like for instance, the geological department's activities were quite actually political, like in terms of like planning where is a potential oil well, or where is a potential active place that could be a site for possible oil reserves. So they wouldn't share this information like with competitors, or it was a corporate secret, if you will, right? So it's really interesting to think about these images now as part of the archive that you have access to, and they become really representational, whereas originally when they were created, they had a very particular usage for the operational operation of the company. So that was one thing I think is really interesting to think about, the role of these images and their multiple lives, private or public, or how they were meant to be shared. But the other thing that I think in terms of like what I think of like visual regimes of these archives, I mean, it's, in the previous film of this trilogy, I had a very different approach to images. In One Image to Acts, which you've seen also, I was mainly thinking about history of labor. I was thinking a lot about history of cinema and cinema spaces. But then I realized there was something a bit missing in how I was looking at the albums. I felt I was following that first degree of indexicality, if you will. Like I was looking at like what was being offered to me by the archivists. They were like, oh, if you want to look at the history of BP, these are the albums you're going to look at. This is what you need. You know, there are like very specific classic albums that you look at if you want to know the history of BP. But these images are not in them, these forms of like geological exploration photographs or survey photographs. They don't usually put those in front of you. So these images often are not the ones that if you want to look at the history of BP, you would look at these, right? So I was really interested, okay, why not these images? Because I felt there was something about the ways in which these moments of explosion were so meticulously documented, why they were documented, right? And who saw these images? Because, you know, in other like documentations of BP, in terms of its films, it's very clear, like these films were made in this year for this audience, this is how they were distributed. But these albums was not really clear to me who was their like public. Of course, it was probably limited, I assume, but so that was one thing that I felt like, okay, this is very interesting, because these are not the ones that you would think about when you think about the history of BP. And at the same time, they were so accurately documented. So when we think about visual regimes, I think it's about like, you know, the forms of tailoring and curation that comes with these forms of historical documentation, and what it means to have a visual history of BP. Who is going to write the visual history of BP? And if you're a researcher, you're going to the archive, what images are going to be offered to you as like the first round of research, the second round of digging in? And so the geological department was something that I started to dig more, and I was extremely fascinated by both the geologists who were documenting their activities, J.V. Harrison being one, but other geologists who had very extensive photo albums of their own that they had donated, and also other technical albums that they were, aerial surveys, photogrammetry albums, and these are specific seismographic photos. That was really fascinating. And one reason that I became really fascinated with this process was because the company that was contracted to do this test was actually from Oklahoma. Was a Tulsa-based company that was doing these tests. And these tests were originally like done in Oklahoma, like in the seismographic method was like founded in Oklahoma, in Tulsa. And there's like, and I went to do some research, and there was a monument to it, monument to seismography. And I went there to film it, but they had removed the monument, but it was supposed to be in the film. So there was like all of these things that they were connected, a bit of a tangent, but yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think it's important to understand sort of the technologies that were being developed and used to lay the ground for essentially the world that we know today, and the sort of the founding technologies and the actors who were developing them and acting them on the ground. So being able to look at that closely is fascinating. So you title the film Scenes of Extraction, and the aesthetics of the film, to me at least, conjure a kind of like forensic analysis of sort of like a scene of a crime. Like there is something in, and I think even at some point it's that the photographs themselves operated as evidence, and they are also a crime. And so there's an implication in the film of this sort of the ways in which what transpired in these early decades of the oil industry's setting its roots and really controlling oil from Iran and setting the foundation for what shaped modern Iranian history and its relationship to the oil industry. There is this kind of unveiling that happens, and also a grappling with the impossibility of really knowing everything or knowing much. I think the very last line of the film points to the silences again, and this is recurrent, right, in terms of what the silences of the archive actually are. So I think just if you could talk a little bit about if is that right, the sort of that this is a kind of your approach intended to kind of treat it as a scene of a crime, or was there something else that you were implying there?
In the film, also I mentioned this line that the photographs are both a witness and a crime scene. Again, I think it was something about the last image of the film, or the image and the moving image. That image was really haunting to me. Mm-hmm. The blurred figures of oil workers like screwing the pipeline. Mm-hmm. And I think of any form of archive work as a form of like a ghost story. I think I also mentioned this in the film, that this is a ghost story. I think archival work is always about like conversing with the missing, conversing with different forms of like companions in the archive. This is what Ariel Azoulay says, that you find people who were, you find companions. And I think it's about like, I'm sure you have the same feeling, like you encounter so many names, so many faces, that you actually start to be familiar with them. Like you completely know them in a sense that like you are happy to see them again, or you have like you make up I have archive crushes. I have like people that I've seen that I like. I'm like, oh, you look very handsome, So like, it's like these ways of being moved by the archive,
the intimacies of it.
Yeah, and I don't want to add too much sentimentality to it, but there's something about these types of a specific type of or corporate archive that it was really hard for me to find a way into it, because it feels like every time we touch it, it's like the BP is bigger than that, like, or the image of it is like moves the project in a very specific way. And as you say, it's like it's part of the story, but it's not all of the story. It's not the end point. It's like a beginning to look at a way of or moment in this history, but it's not the complete picture. It's like an incomplete picture of the life in Iran at the time, or of life in Iraq. So it's like, how do you? But it pretends to be so complete. So that's the dialectic. Is like it's so the presence of it. It's so totalizing, but at the same time, you always have to remind yourself that this was not it. So I think that's kind of the tension of working with this specific type of archives.
Yeah. So the one of the things that you do to sort of problematize and treat the archive that is vital to its presentation in the film is the use of sound. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit both about the use of voice, because your voice is the narration and leads us through, and I always, Sanaz, your writing is so beautiful, and I always want, every time I watch one of these films, I think I want to just read the transcript over and over again, because it's really crafted in a way that gives us, each phrase gives us so much to think with in relationship to the images we see. So there's your voice, and then there's also the sounding of silent films. And so for anyone who is not aware, a large number of the film footage that we see is actually silent film footage that has been given atmospheric soundtracks. So could you talk a little bit about those choices and then how that unfolded in your process?
So I worked with Chris and Jeremy Leon on all my 3 films, and we have been working together since 2020. So it's been 6 years, and we have like a very collaborative process of thinking about me coming from I'm an image person. I'm not a sound person. And them being completely, like, they're musicians and sound designers, and so our worlds kind of like clash in this way, because of course I think a lot about how there is this over reliance on seeing, right? In terms of like seeing modernity, it's not about we don't hear it. It's always about like the reliance on the images of oil. It's not about sounds of oil. It's like seeing oil, experiencing it through just our vision. So that was one thing that at the beginning, from since One Image to Acts, for instance, like Chris did a lot of work on thinking about what it means to sit in a pipeline, or like what it means to, how do we think about echo? How do we think about like earthiness of it? So there was a lot of thinking about concepts to think about how we are going to create a soundtrack for these archives. That was one thing. The other thing, again, for the silent films, that in Scenes of Extraction, I made a very specific choice of giving them soundtrack. It was after seeing this film called Mother Dao, the Turtle-like. We are in so maybe there are film historians here who know this film, which was made by, I forgot his name, he's a Dutch filmmaker who made this film that was created from the archives of the colonial Dutch film unit in Indonesia. And what he did, he made a montage of all these films, but then he went back to Indonesia and he recorded sounds from the same plantations, the same factories, and he collected diegetic sounds. When I saw the film, I was really fascinated by the film. The film has a lot, it's a different thing to unpack itself, its production, but I was just interested in the role of sound and the added sound, so it really intrigued me. I was like, okay, I'm really curious about this process. What can I do with this? And it was an exercise for me to think about what does this do, adding these sounds. And it's very intentional. We did it in a way that is not fully, it's diegetic, but we're not trying to foley it completely as it's like matching every movement. So there's a little bit of discrepancy that is intentional. Again, this is a bit another example. I give you 2 examples. That was one that someone made a specific decision to add sound to silent film. The other one is a film by Philip Schaffner, The Half Moon Files. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's actually about a sound archive. It's about the sound archives from the sound archive that was recorded by a German linguist and anthropologist during the First World War in Germany, recording the languages of Indian prisoners of wars in Germany. So, and it's one of, I think, the oldest sound archives in the world, and it's honestly, the first time I watched this film, The Half Moon Files, I highly recommend watching it if you haven't. I was really like shocked in a way by just hearing these soldiers is speaking to this megaphone, or I don't know what they're called when you record the audio. Like it's like this funnel almost. And they were singing. They were talking about their favorite food. They were talking about how much they miss home. They were talking about like their family. And again, as an image person, I was really taken in a very different way by this sound archive. And again, it made me think a lot more about sound, because again, I'm guilty as charged. I'm a visual person. I come from the world of images, and visual history is my way of thinking about like the past and history. So I was like, okay, I'm missing something here. I need to do something with the sound. And that was basically the process, to really try to add a soundtrack and try to create this diegetic soundtrack for the footages. And the other thing also was, again, I was thinking a lot about like Tina Kamt and her way of thinking about like this, listening to images. Because I think a lot about reading images. For me, images are textual sources in a way to understand history. I was like, how do I add this sound layer and make them sonic? And one thing also, the musician for the film is Showan Tawakkol, and he's an ethnomusicologist who actually was very familiar with the folklore songs and the maqams of that area in Khuzestan. And we had some archival sessions. Like I would show him the footage with the trains, and we would say, okay, what like trains, like early optimism and like infrastructure, opening up, modernity. So, and then we would get to like dark optimism. So like we would kind of like try to come up with these different ways of him trying to improvise sound for these footages. So we would think like, okay, we would just brainstorm them a lot of the times. And but majority of the sound is Kamanche, Showan Tawakkol did, and we do a lot of woodwinds, woodwork, we do a lot of saxophone, a lot of flute, and then the other one are just like different sound designs and sound editing. But these, musically, there were these three elements.
It's fantastic. I mean, it creates an experience of watching these images. As someone who is very familiar with some of the silent films that are reproduced in the film, I mean, it's transformative to have actually sound as a dimension of interpreting the images, or even just responding to them effectively. So it's, speaking of image, so the way that you present images and edit them on screen and select, figures who might not seem prominent or are sort of marginalized within a photograph, and then center them in the way that you depict them in film, and the way that you layer, and the way that you create absences in photographs through their presentation in the film, are all calling attention to your critique of the archive itself. And I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about your technical process in working with these images. You're sort of straddling photographs that are available as prints, and things that have been digitized. And I know, have a specific process of digitizing photographs as well. So could you tell us a little bit how you work with these images and how that informs what comes to the screen?
So some of the footages here, I actually re-recorded the screen with a Super 8. So it's towards the end, the moments are from the explosion. It was actually a way for me to, at the beginning, I didn't know if I could get access to the BP archives, like the video ones. So I went to BP Video Library and I re-recorded them with a Super 8 film, with a Super 8 camera. But eventually I was able to get access to them. But then I decided to use those footages anyway, because I think it was a part of the process, and I felt that actually turned the films into different things. So I reused them. I do a lot of repurposing of the photographs. I print them a lot, re-scan them. I do a lot of different collages. I do a lot of 3D work from the archives. The 3D materials that you see, they're all from either the aerial surveys or the photogrammetry surveys that were done by BP, or some of them are also from the J.V. Harrison's films, the Scottish geologist, and he's panning, like he had this habit of panning, doing panned landscapes. So he had like this series of like reels that they were just like landscapes panned. So we used those to create those really long kind of like 3Ds. So I do a lot of these playing around with different ways of either printing the images, re-scanning them, enlarging them, because I also work with exhibitions as a format. So, and in some ways it's kind of like hacking the archive, especially for some. I shouldn't say this probably now, but yeah, it's there are different ways to print, reprint, re-record, things like that. So, but it's also, I think it's nice to, this one was mainly digital, but One Image to Axe is also very tactile. A lot of the times I do a lot of things with hand and film them, and they're in the film. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit? So this film, as we said, is part of a trilogy of your films that focus on histories of oil, specifically Iran, but also its relationship in a global context. So could you just put the film into context or conversation, and how maybe one film has led to the other, in terms of, so the first one Image, Two Acts, this one, Scenes of Extraction, and your third film, congratulations, it's going to premiere later this month in Paris, as was mentioned, An Incomplete Calendar. Yeah. So what is the relationship between those?
So One Image, Two Acts was really focused on history of construction of cinemas in the oil towns, and I focused on two Iranian filmmakers, Amir Naderi and Ibrahim Golestan, and their influence of oil infrastructure on their filmmaking, and the infrastructures that were mobilized by BP in their filmmaking practices. So it was really centered around the history of cinema in relation to oil. Scenes of Extraction, as you saw, it was really about this very geological history and looking at the geological department. And then An Incomplete Calendar was something that I started from the beginning while I was working on these two films. And it's a feature film. And it looks at the history of OPEC, actually, and looks at the history of OPEC, or for those of you who don't know, OPEC stands for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And it was the first alliance of oil-producing countries from the Global South to come together. In 1960, it was established in Baghdad in 1960, and it started with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Venezuela, and I'm blanking on the other one. And then it grew to have Qatar, Libya, Algeria, Gabon, Nigeria, Ecuador, Indonesia. So it connected Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So I started to look at the history of OPEC because I was really fascinated by its early history, the first 2 decades, as I was working on the history of BP. So it became a side project that I started to collect magazines and archives and newsreels and films. OPEC also produced films, actually. So I became really interested, okay, what type of films OPEC made? Who did OPEC commission to make these films? And then I looked at history of magazines and print publication from some of the people who were involved with OPEC. History of, for instance, a magazine called Naft al-Arab, or Arab Oil, which was published in Lebanon by a Saudi oil minister, Abdullah al-Turaiqi, who was kind of like this pan-Arabist, pro-Nasser figure who went into exile to Lebanon and started this magazine. And the whole thing kind of like, it became about this story of like these oil ministers coming together, but they also had a lot of disagreements. So that's sort of like the story of the third film that looks at this project. So what does it mean to make now a collective oil basket from from these oil-producing countries, that some of them were actually either directly colonized or some of them were under concession, but also some of them were not colonized, like Saudi Arabia was never really colonized. So how do you make a table? What type of table you are going to make? And but also what are the cultural productions around it? So in a way, it was necessary for the third film to be the alternative or this counter archive of oil that is from the period of post-nationalization of these countries and OPEC, and it's kind of like rise and fall, and looking at the relationship between OPEC and non-aligned movement, and because they kind of like were at the same time, and the politics of OPEC in relation to these other third world projects. So it was necessary to end the trilogy with something that was around the history of OPEC in relation to this earlier history.
I'm sure we have lots of really interesting questions coming from the audience as well. So I will allow some others to ask some questions as well.
Thank you, Sana, for that absolutely beautiful film. And I wanted to, there's a lot to say, but I'll just ask it in the form of a question. That one of the invitations you make to the audience is to engage in your speculative history of, who are these people that we see, especially in the Harrison's ethnographic camera, like it's history of labor, but also of dispossession. And so I was taking you up on that offer and thinking of some of the people I got curious about. One of the pictures was, several of the pictures actually, there were guards around the Geological Survey. They were carrying guns. And so maybe this is not a thing, but I was like thinking, did they meet any opposition? Did BP meet any opposition to the project? I mean, what was being guarded there? By this, and so anyway, it's an invitation also if you had a trace that you were following which came to a dead end, or you had more curiosity about and couldn't find.
Thank you. I'll try my best to based on something that I was reading, maybe will offer you some insight. I remember reading that there was this account of like geologists had to stay in camps during the season that was for them bearable because the weather was extremely hot during summer. So the geologists would usually go to these sites on, like, let's say 5 or 6 months duration, and they would leave during the summers because extremely hot weather. And they would stay for long durations of time, right? Like over like 5, 6 months. And they had really close relationship with the people who were locals because of those extended stays. At the same time, what I came across was that people were often suspicious of the geologists, or people who were like foreign, people who would stay with them for a really long period of time. Sometimes they had like a lot of rumors or conspiracies that some of these foreigners have been dressing up as local population. They wanted to blend in to gather information. And I think Mona probably knows this best. There was always like these conspiracies around, like, I don't know if there was the same thing in Iraq, but in Iran people were always, we have a joke that everything is the fault of the British, or if there's something goes wrong, a British is behind it. It's because like, and they had all of these things that this guy who was a British who would like dress up as a local, like Iranian, like would like make himself look like a local person. There was a lot of these things, and I think I came across of them, these conspiracies that were really common among people, and this sense of distrust towards these foreign staffs that they would be stationed for long durations of time. So, and I think in terms of like the dissent, I think Mona might know better in terms of like the history of strikes and histories of like labor dissent towards these forms of like specific staffs that are usually stationed far from the company offices, right? Mm-hmm. Because these areas were quite far from like where, you know, that they were protected, or they had like their office compounds, so they were quite far from those areas. So I think it's also interesting compared to those, yeah.
Sorry, it won't be a very coherent question because I'm living an incoherent life in an incoherent time, in a particularly incoherent place, in an incoherent world. But thank you. It's amazing to hear you talk about your film. I mean, Mona said you write beautifully, you speak so beautifully too.
Thank you.
One of the things, you know, like when I was going to grad school, we were talking a lot about digital video coming in. This is the 90s, right? And I remember the moment when Peter Greenway made that film, Pollock book, with like digital things opening up, so non-linear editing. I bring this up because, you know, you do a lot with that. The kind of windows are open, of course, on your computer. And the way that it feels like something unfolding out of a photograph, right? Like something that emerges. Mona used the word vital before. It's very vitalistic, like there's something live there that's opening up. And it made me think of mitosis, cells, you know, multiplying, and cancer even. And, you know, a lot of the times we hear now from, many of us say this, with my taxpayers' money, and I'm outraged, right, what's happening. It's not just that. It's also the way in which I think we have cancer in us, all of us, that we live our lives, we have privileges, we enjoy our careers and do things. All of it is deeply rooted in this kind of extraction. And that's, I think, key. It's not just this moment.
Yeah.
And this film really shows that. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you, Ashkar. Yeah, I think it's something, it's also like what you said about, like, I'm sorry, it's a bit of a tangent, but this idea of a violation of international law. What international law? It's like, where you sleep, like, you know, it's, so that's something, I just wanted to mention that. But one thing that I think, again, I want to pick up what you said about like the introduction of digital kind of like culture, because I was talking to Mona actually. I was telling Mona that it's amazing when you started doing your archival work at BP Archive, you were actually doing it on VHS tapes. Like Mona would go to the BP archives and she would actually see all of these things on like on VHS tape, but I saw these things on bpvideolibrary.com. Right, so it's like this really interesting way of like in my bed, like on a laptop, you know, like, and it's sort of like this weird way of accessibility, and I think that also completely changes how you see these materials. So I think it's very important when we think about these types of archival montage films. And then the other thing was also because of that bpvideolibrary.com, that's partly why I was kind of like, I had this tick in me. I was like, I want to film them. Like, I want to re-film this thing on my laptop. And that was one reason, partly, except that I had to rip it off, but I also wanted to kind of like really re-film this laptop. Because I was like, why not? I'm seeing them on my laptop, I might as well film them, but on cellulite, on analog film. So, yeah. So in some ways, those questions also, I think, they showed themselves in the process, yeah.
I was wondering, like, since, like, the during current, like, tough times right now, I was, like, wondering, what is, like, the one core message you hope the audience carries with them after, like, everything ends, like here? I was wondering, like, how would you like correlate this to like times that are happening right now with like either Venezuela, with the oil industry? Like, do you see a pattern?
I guess you know what Mona said at the beginning is like you see the construction of infrastructures, and then we see them being kind of like completely annihilated by the US at the moment. It's like, if there's anything I want people to leave, is like, it's about sovereignty. It's about sovereignty, and it's about, it's actually like, I've said this before in other talks, it's about how, it's about models of governance that, according to the US, right? So in the Middle East, there's like 3 models right? That the US wants. Like you're either completely shredded, you're a shredded society with no national means of production, or you're a client estate and you bend forward and backward, or you're sanctioned to the roof and your oxygen is also sanctioned. So it's like you pick and choose between these three. So I think it's, I think it's really about like this, as Bhaskar was saying, it's like these economies are, they're so entangled. I honestly like, I feel very defeated, honestly. I actually feel extremely defeated. There was some times that I felt like it makes sense to make films and do all of this work, but I don't believe in it anymore. So I can say, yeah, let's think about this all together, but actually I don't believe in it anymore. It's a very honest answer, because at the end of the day, you are just annihilated. I really don't know what to say.
When I was watching the film, I was constantly thinking about like, oh, how does this look like in an exhibition format? That is like, a video installation, like sculpture, things, photographs, all of that. How would you imagine that? Or have you had the opportunity of presenting this body of work, this research, as a part, as a sort of a video installation or sort of like an exhibition space?
Thank you. Yes, this was an exhibition first. I presented the film in an expanded format, and what I included in the exhibition was a couple of vignettes that they didn't make it in the film. As I said, I'm really obsessed with history of photography, and when I was doing research in this geological department archives, I saw that there was a Dutch scientist that he made a camera for IIOC, a camera that would go inside the oil well and it would take photographs of the earth inside. And this is very technical, like because it's a film camera, you need flash, you need electricity for the flash, you need water to clean the lens because it's like dirty inside. And he made a prototype, and he made a camera and he sent it to IIOC, and there was a lot of negatives of the pictures of Earth. Like, it's really bizarre to say it, but actually he made this camera device that would go inside. And originally I had this as part of the film, but then it didn't work out. It didn't really fit in the film, so I took it out. So I had a section with that history of the camera and the archives from that camera and the prototypes. And then I had like footages from contemporary kind of like oil well cameras that they go inside to kind of like check the oil wells. And there were other photographs from the archive that I hadn't included in the film, and they were in the exhibition. It was rather a smaller scale exhibition, and it was quite minimal, but it did exist as a form of an expanded version of the film. But I've mainly presented the film as a single channel, like a cinema piece. But in a complete calendar that I'm finishing, was an installation in many iterations before it became a film. So I do both film and exhibitions, and then it's a film first and becomes an exhibition, or it's the other way around. But this one was mainly the film, and the expanded version was quite minimal compared to the other ones.
And I just want to say, I think the materiality of what you're working with comes across in the film. As you said, in the first film, you actually see Sanaz handling. You see elements of the materials the photographs that were installed and sort of in real space and three-dimensional space, and you see Sanaz's hands working with the materials. And here you get a sense of the materiality of the archive, which is just so beautiful. Thank you for this beautiful film. I believe in your films and their importance tremendously.
Thank you so much.
And I want to invite you all to thank Sanaz.